What's up everybody, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be looking at probably the most refined version of the Pyromancer build that I'm currently playing with. And essentially the objective for me in this refining or in building the Pyromancer this way was that Pyromancer has long since now become like the character that I've always obviously played with the most. It's also the character that I've carried the most with in my viewer carry events. Have a look out for those. There's another one coming up soon. But basically I wanted to build a Pyromancer version that was good in solo, durable in solo, and able to do fast clears in solo and possibly chase world records, but also be extremely good in a multiplayer perspective or in a co-op scenario where you could push out massive amounts of AoE damage and really take down, you know, huge amounts of enemies at once, or at least huge amounts of health from enemies at once. So I've obviously tinkered with many different builds, including Phaser, which is really powerful and really good at single point damage, but not so good at clearing. And that's kind of like the reason I've mentioned it before in some of my other videos why I don't really like it. I really like the big damage numbers, but I just don't really like it for its clear speed, which is not that fantastic. So today we're going to look at a build which solves that problem, no problem at all. The clear speed is insane. I've managed to improve a lot of my own personal best clear times. There's one of these clips running in the background right now, which you'll see a clear time at the end. And yeah, let's do that. Let's get right into the build. So when we look at the character, we're going to do the usual. We're going to go through the weapons, we're going to go through the armor and the mods on the armor, we're going to talk about the skills, and lastly we're going to talk about the class tree. Now I'll breeze through the first three parts of this because a lot of this is kind of like not really new, and the way that it's combined is not that new, but we will spend some time around the class tree and then consequently a little piece after that, just essentially explaining the decision for some of these and basically what I was trying to achieve with this build. Now when we look at the weapons themselves, we have obviously my death shield with fortress and shadow comet on. I cannot say enough how much I love shadow comet. I love the ability to poke and, you know, introduce, you know, this level of damage at a distance away from enemies, and as also on a 3-second cooldown. And at the same time, if you hip fire this gun, you can actually proc it multiple times. So if you have a cluster of enemies standing close to one another and you hip fire and the pellets from the shotgun hit 3 or 4 of them, it'll actually pull down 4 or 3 shadow comets, and they all do AoE. So this can potentially wipe out a whole group of enemies, and you can actually see that in the run, which is going to be on a little bit later. I do also use the Anemoy, which has got Moaning Winds and Fortress on it. And lastly, I also use Torment and Agony, which has got Moaning Winds and Clip Combustion on it. Now, right at this point in time, let me quickly just address the naysayers or the haters or whomever that usually have a problem with Moaning Winds being on the build. The point is this: if you want to be pushing extremely fast clear times with the Pyromancer, this is a combination that you have to use because it is the most efficient. Does this build work without this combination? Absolutely. And I've actually showed that in another clip that you can look at my channel and see, where I use completely different weapons and I use a very similar skill setup and it works no problemo. In fact, the clear times are very mwah. So the reason why we have Moaning Winds on here though is because I'm also using this build to try and chase, eventually hopefully trying to clear some you know, world first, or not world first, but rather world record clears of certain expeditions if I can. Now when we move over to the armor itself, the point is, now you'll notice that I'm still using 3-piece Akari, but I've switched over to the chest, the legs, or the pants rather, and the shoes, the boots. And the reason for that is so that I can have cooldown reduction on all 5 my pieces. Because the other reason why this build works so well for me in its current, you know, iteration is because I'm able to have so much cooldown reduction in my choices in the class tree, but also through all of my gear having cooldown reduction on them. So firstly, on the helmet, I've got Phoenix Force and Fire Tsunami on there, so I'm still getting the width of the firewall, but I'm also getting the Phoenix Force boost on overheat. Then on the chest, I've got Detonator and Captain Hunter. Detonator here just Obviously, you know, halving my cooldown on overheat, which is very essential, and Captain Hunter giving me an additional 25% damage to elites. Now, this build has no problem with dealing with the chaff. The small minions die literally in a half a combo, and you can often kill them with just hitting them with essentially, you know, 2 heat waves, and that'll take care of the problem. But this Captain Hunter just helps you deal overall more with killing, you know, the tougher enemies, the elites, the bosses, and so on. The reason why I use Captain Hunter instead of Ashen Boost or something like that, because Captain Hunter is 25%, Ashen Boost is 20%. And again, the point is that I don't have problem with killing the trash mobs. The problems are the elites, and this gives me the biggest benefit against elites, essentially. Then on the pants, I'm using Anomaly Echo and Tidal Wave. Tidal Wave, of course, giving me my second heat wave, which is quite important due to the fact that this build also utilizes Burnt Out, which does quite a fair bit of additional damage. The Anomaly Echo is just good for you have extremely low cooldowns, so essentially you can always make sure that this buff is up. You always have this additional 11.4 anomaly power, basically. Then on the gloves, I have Ash Increase Range. That's self-explanatory. Ash Blast's range by default is very small, so you kind of need this. And I have Death Sentence, which is again one of the sort of like clutch mods on this build. You definitely notice the difference with having it on or not having it on, but this basically just makes that you get additional weapon damage and anomaly damage against enemies that have been affected by the Ash Blast by 40 and 50% respectively for 5 seconds after. And lastly, on the boots, I of course have Master Consumer, which comes with the boots themselves, which means that overheat can consume either burn or ash or both, and if it consumes both, then it does 150% damage basically. And then Burnt Out, and this is the reason for having 2 heat waves, is Burnt Out essentially makes it that damaged enemies take 25% more damage from everything else for 8 seconds when they've been hit by a heat wave. Now, that in combination with the Akari set bonus, which basically says that every enemy damaged by a heat wave grants 50% additional anomaly power over 10 seconds. The point is that and that's capped, by the way, at 300%. So if you hit 6 minions, you are getting the maximum benefit of this. And that's another reason why we kind of use fire tsunami, because with the width of the fire wave or the heat wave being bigger, you can usually get that with 1 heat wave, you can get the maximum buff, or failing that with 2 heat waves, you can hit 6 minions and you get the maximum buff. Now, of course, as I've mentioned with the skills, we're using Heat Wave, Ash Blast, and Overheat, which is the standard, I guess, Akari combo, if you want to call it that. But I'll draw your attention to the cooldowns, which we have here. We have a sub 7 second Heat Wave, 6.9 seconds to be exact. We have 12.3 seconds Ash Blast, which is good. It's not as good as going top 3 Pyromancer, because up there at that point you can probably drop it to about 10.8 or 11.3 depending on your mods and what you have on your gear. But we also have an extremely low overheat of 4.9 seconds. Now when we go over to the class 3, this is really where the real big difference resides in this build, and it's kind of like a Frankenstein situation right here. But let me explain the idea of what I was trying to do here. First off, I wanted to create a situation where it didn't matter which skills I was using, whether I was using Overheat, Heat Wave, or Ash Blast, I would always have some kind of a boost or some kind of like an increase to the damage, or an increase to the AP, or an increase to, you know, just the ability itself. But the idea is that no one of the 3 abilities is wasted and it's just a primer for another ability. Now what I mean by that is, we can take 2 examples. For instance, Hot Situation is a fantastic ability because of the way how it enhances the damage that comes after Ash Blast. All right, but then you also have, for instance, with Fire and Anomaly, which essentially increases the damage that comes after Overheat, because both of these increase your anomaly power by a certain percentage. Now the other objective here, of course, and you'll notice that, is that I wanted to pick up as much cooldown reduction as I could possibly get, and lastly I also wanted to pick up as much anomaly power as I could possibly get. So that is the reason for things like, Wildfire, and obviously also picking up all the cooldown nodes as you see them here, but also the reason for picking up things like Archmage and Gifted, and basically Mark's Accumulation, and all of these for anything that gives me additional damage. I'm also picking up Resistance 20% additional here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the downsides to this build, or the only real problem with this build that I have. But also this build picks up 2 nodes of resistance piercing by 15%, giving you an overall resistance piercing of 30%, which is huge and really powerful in multiplayer as well. So if we then look just at this quick little table that I made here, the point is that I'm trying to illustrate to you how we have overlapping buffs in one rotation of, you know, casting all of your abilities out. And the point is that the rotation for this build is slightly different than the usual. And what I mean by that is usually this kind of setup essentially goes heat wave, or however many heat waves you have. If you only have 1, it's 1. If you have 3, then it's 3. Then you go ash blast, then you go overheat, and then you kind of, you know, by that time your next heat waves are kind of ready to go again, and you go with that. And then you mix in moaning winds and everything as you need. Now with this particular setup, what I'm actually doing is I'm overheating first, then I'm using all my heat waves, then I'm doing ash blast, and then I dump a massive overheat to usually wipe out everything that's on the screen. Now at this point in time, anything that's left alive, I'm usually positioned in such a place that I'm close to them, and then I can switch to, you know, moaning winds and finish them off, or possibly even hit them with the shadow comet if they're further away. But that is in essence the kind of like the rotation of skills with this. Now the benefit that comes from this, and again just showing each one of the cooldowns at the top there and how fast you can essentially get this out and rinse repeat for another set. The point is that the first time when you hit overheat, you automatically engage anomaly echo, which gives you the additional anomaly bonus. You also get with fire and anomaly, which gives you 12% additional AP. Now both of these two, you know, stretch for 10 seconds, so you kind of like still benefit from them a little bit later in the rotation. But they massively benefit your 2 heat waves, which are coming out directly after that overheat. Now the 2 heat waves in turn, again, whatever you're hitting with those heat waves, and generally you should try to hit some trash with it, but you should also try to hit the elite or the boss that you're trying to kill, is also affecting them with burnt out, which again makes them take 25% additional, and that's per heat wave, by the way. So if you hit them twice, that's 50% additional damage that they're taking. Now at this point in time, you're ready to essentially start the lock of the combo, and you hit ash blast, which at that point in time gives you 30% additional damage, or you know, anomaly damage to the target that you've just ash blasted for 5 seconds. And this is the benefit that you get from death sentence. At the same time as well, now you proc hot situation, and hot situation further on increases your overall AP by 45%. Now that's with most of all of these benefits still in place by the time you get to this point. That means that when you hit that overheat, it's huge. And this is where the majority of the damage of this build comes from. Not from moaning winds, not from shadow comet, not from anywhere else, not even from ash blast. Overheat is the maximizer here, and I'll show at the end of the video. You can see just like a printout of the damage of a specific run, of this run actually that's in the background right now, and you'll see what I mean. Lastly, when you hit that final overheat, you also engaging Phoenix Force, which if you've taken down 10 enemies, essentially increases your anomaly power by another 64k, and further on empowers your next round of heat waves, which at this point here you're just about ready to get going on again. At the same time as well, Master Consumer is consumed at this point here, so anything that had burn on them or had ash on them or anything like that just doubles the, well, 150% additional damage, or 150% total damage. So basically, you know, double, not double, but half more is essentially done to them. So this achieves the goal that I set out to do, and that was that I wanted there to be, you know, intrinsic benefits at each turn for all of this, and that it needed to be covered at all times by buffs, so that, you know, there's no skill that is kind of wasted or is just like a proper upper for the rest of the skills. This means that in this setup, your heat waves are also doing a considerable amount of damage, which is really good. So nonetheless, the last part as well, just remember that you are also, you know, doing 10% additional damage to enemies that are ashed. You're also doing 8% additional damage to enemies that are marked, aka burning. And then lastly, again, your resistance piercing is 30%, which is really good and really does help, especially in co-op scenarios where your ash blast sometimes gets resisted. And this is something that I've realized through trial and error, that high health minions will often resist your first or second rotation of this, you know, skill. And so this definitely cuts, you know, helps cutting through that, but also just helps with dealing additional damage. But that's basically it. I'm gonna leave the footage running until the end, but this is the build. I can't really think of anything that per se that I would improve here. Perhaps there is a better choice in the place of Phoenix Force, but right now I've tried a whole bunch of different things and Phoenix Force just seems to be the best fit. Now, one last thing, something that might be a problem is, especially if you're playing solo and you're not used to playing this kind of build, survivability might be a bit of an issue for you. Now, if that is the case, what you can do is one of the resistance piercing nodes can be swapped out and you can pick up Phoenix, because you're right by Phoenix when you pick up the last Archmage node in the Tempest tree at the bottom. So you can pick up Phoenix, which gives you an additional chance to respawn and basically helps you to deal with, just survivability to a degree. That's basically it. Thank you very much if you've watched up until this far, and let me know in the comments down below if you have any interest in building something like this. Maybe you have something better, maybe you already have an improvement to this. But that's it for today. Please go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this sort of thing. Sorry, I am literally melting here. I've done so many takes of this shit just to not look like I just got out of a swimming pool. But in any case, sorry for going off on a tangent there, but thanks so much guys for stopping by. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, a great afternoon, and a fucking wonderful evening wherever you are. And until next video, fucking cheers.
Say my name. Boohtysweat.
Who?